Captain Ryan Cole's boots echoed against the ancient stone floor as he moved deeper into the alien palace. The air grew colder with every step, filled with the scent of dust and strange herbs burning in unseen braziers. The walls shimmered faintly, carved with symbols that pulsed as though alive. He should have turned back. He knew this. Every corridor was forbidden to outsiders. Every path meant to scare away trespassers. But Ryan had not come this far to run from glowing walls or ghostly whispers. Somewhere inside this palace was the truth about the Mistress and her people's hidden power, a secret buried for centuries. His hand brushed against the wall as he followed the faint vibrations through the stone. At first, it was only a low hum, but then he felt it under his skin, almost like a heartbeat. The corridor ended at a massive door that glowed with red veins of light. Its surface looked as though it was carved from a single piece of living crystal. The glow pulsed in rhythm like the slow breath of a sleeping beast. Ryan paused, his throat dry. He could feel eyes on him, though. No guard was in sight. He raised his hand slowly and pressed his palm against the surface. The door shuddered. A sudden jolt ran up his arm like lightning, and he nearly pulled back. But instead, he pressed harder. The veins of light flared bright, blinding him for a second, and with a deep, grinding sound, the door cracked open. Air rushed out from the chamber beyond, heavy and warm, carrying the scent of iron and something ancient, something wrong. Ryan staggered inside, and the door slammed shut behind him with the finality of a tomb. The chamber glowed with light from a pool at its center, liquid silver that moved in ripples without wind or touch. The walls rose high above, covered in strange runes that shifted as if alive. His footsteps echoed unnaturally, as though the chamber itself was listening. He felt as if he had stepped into the lungs of some giant creature, and each breath he took was stolen from it. Then the voice came. "Insolent human." The word struck him like a hammer, vibrating in his bones. "You've entered the wrong orifice, one you've defiled." Ryan spun around. At the far end of the chamber stood the Mistress. Tall, draped in flowing black and silver, her eyes glowed with a fury that could burn stars. Her hair, like liquid obsidian, floated around her as if underwater, and every line of her body spoke of command. Behind her, the shadows twisted, forming shapes of alien guards that stepped forward with spears crackling with energy. Ryan's chest tightened. He had been discovered too soon. Yet, though fear pressed against his ribs, he kept his posture steady. He had seen death before. He had faced monsters on distant worlds. What was one alien mistress compared to that? "You dare set foot in the sacred chamber of my ancestors," she hissed, her voice sharp as blades. "This chamber is a womb of power, a vessel of life for my people. No human was ever meant to touch it. You stain it with your presence, your breath, your unworthy flesh." Her words carried more than anger. They carried shame. To her, his entry was not just trespass, it was violation. The guards tightened their circle around him, energy weapons humming, ready to strike at her command. Ryan lifted his chin. "I wasn't looking for trouble. I was looking for answers." Laughter, cold and cruel, filled the chamber. The Mistress's lips curled in contempt. "Answers? You will find only pain. Do you know how many have begged for mercy here? Even among my kind, only the chosen may enter this place. You have broken a law older than your fragile race." The walls pulsed as though reacting to her fury. The silver pool at the chamber's center rippled violently, and for a heartbeat, Ryan thought he saw shapes within it. Faces, screaming silently from beneath the surface. The Mistress lifted her hand. Energy flared between her fingers, crimson and sharp, like liquid fire. She pointed at Ryan, her voice rising in thunder. "You should not have lived long enough to open that door. No human has ever touched it and survived, yet you stand here, breathing. Why?" The guards moved closer. Ryan's every instinct screamed at him to fight or flee, but he stayed rooted. His heart pounded hard, but his voice was steady. "Maybe your chamber chose wrong. Or maybe it knows something you don't." Gasps rippled among the guards. To speak back to the Mistress was unthinkable. Her eyes widened, then narrowed, her fury battling against something else. Curiosity. For the first time, she hesitated. "Blasphemy," she whispered, though her voice shook. "You think you are worthy? You think this place belongs to you?" She raised her hand higher, ready to strike him down with a bolt of pure power. The runes on the wall burned brighter, and the pool roared as though a storm had erupted inside it. Ryan clenched his fists. If he was going to die, he would die standing. His gaze locked with hers, unflinching, even as her energy crackled inches from his chest. But then, the chamber itself answered. The walls pulsed with light, the runes flaring so brightly the guards shielded their eyes. The pool surged upward, splashing silver liquid across the floor. The energy in the mistress's hand fizzled and died. For one terrifying moment, she looked not like a goddess, but like a woman caught off balance, uncertain of her own dominion. The chamber had not destroyed Ryan for entering. It had awakened. The silence that followed was heavier than any shout. The mistress's lips trembled, her blazing eyes fixed on the human who had done what none of her kind dared. The guards froze, waiting for her command, but she said nothing. Her fury warred with disbelief, and though her voice thundered once more, it no longer carried certainty. "You should not be alive," she said. "And yet the chamber accepts you. Insolent human, perhaps you are more than you seem." Ryan stood in the glowing silence, knowing the real trial had just begun. Ryan's wrists were bound by chains that burned against his skin as he was dragged through the palace corridors. The guards shoved him forward without mercy, their spears sparking whenever he slowed. Every step echoed with the sound of alien boots, heavy and cold, as though the walls themselves were waiting for his fall. The corridors widened into a grand chamber, lit by hovering crystals that glowed with crimson fire. High above sat the mistress, her throne carved from black stone that seemed alive, veins of silver crawling through it like frozen lightning. Her eyes followed him with hatred, but beneath that hate was something sharper, something unsettled. The council was already gathered. Dozens of alien nobles filled the tiers surrounding the throne, their robes heavy with jewels, their faces twisted with disdain. They leaned close to one another, whispering and sneering, some laughing openly when Ryan stumbled. The echo of their mockery rolled through the chamber like thunder. A guard shoved him to his knees before the mistress. The chains rattled loudly, and Ryan's shoulders ached under the weight of his captivity. He lifted his head slowly, refusing to let them see defeat in his eyes. The mistress stood, her tall form draped in flowing cloth that shimmered with every movement. "This," she declared, her voice ringing with authority, "is the trespasser who dared to enter the sacred chamber. A human, a weakling, a thief of what was never his." The crowd erupted with scornful cries. Some shouted that he should be executed at once. Others demanded his body be broken and displayed as warning. Their words mixed into a roar of cruelty, each insult sharper than the last. But Ryan did not lower his gaze. His calm defiance drew attention, and slowly the laughter changed. Some nobles leaned forward, frowning as though puzzled. Why did the human not beg? Why did he not shake in terror? The mistress raised her hand, and the chamber fell silent. Her eyes locked on Ryan's, cold as steel. "You stand before my council not as a guest, not as a warrior, not even as a slave. You are filth who has spat upon the laws of my ancestors. In this palace, your kind is beneath animals. Tell me, human, why should you still breathe?" Ryan's throat was dry, but he forced his voice steady. "Because I am not afraid of you." A wave of gasps spread through the council. Some nobles rose to their feet in outrage. One shouted that his tongue should be cut out. Another demanded death on the spot. The mistress's lips curled, her eyes narrowing, but once again there was a flicker of hesitation. She stepped closer, her robes sweeping across the floor like a tide of shadows. Her face was close enough now for Ryan to see the faint glow beneath her skin, like fire hidden in glass. "You think courage will save you? Foolish human. I have seen warriors stronger than you crawl at my feet, begging to die quickly." Ryan met her gaze without flinching. "Then maybe you haven't seen a real human yet." The words struck like a blade. The chamber went silent again, the nobles stunned by the sheer insolence. The mistress stared at him, her hands clenched into fists. She could have ordered his execution in that instant. She could have ended his defiance with a word. But something in her chest tightened. His voice did not shake, his eyes did not break. Her anger twisted into something else, something she could not name. To cover it, she raised her voice again. "Very well, you claim to stand without fear. Then you will face the trial of shame." The chamber stirred, the nobles whispering fiercely. Some smiled cruelly, others leaned forward with hunger in their eyes. The trial of shame was known even among her kind as a punishment that broke the strongest warriors, turning them into hollow shells. No one had ever entered it and walked away unchanged. Ryan felt the guards pull him to his feet, dragging him back. He asked no questions, offered no protests. His silence only made the aliens more restless. Some hissed at him, some jeered, but none could shake the steady look on his face. The mistress lifted her hand, silencing the chamber once more. Let him be taken. Let him see what no human should ever endure. Let his courage rot in his throat. She leaned closer, her eyes narrowing into slits. And when you crawl to me, broken and begging, I will remind you of this moment. You are not defiant. You are only lost. The guards yanked the chains hard and dragged Ryan toward the dark passage beyond the throne room. The whispers of the council chased him, laughter and cruel wagers filling his ears. Some bet he would last an hour, others said minutes. The cruelest laughed and said he would break before the first test even began. Yet as Ryan stumbled into the shadows, he allowed himself a faint smile. Let them mock, let them sneer. He knew something none of them understood. He had seen worse than chains, worse than shame. Humanity was built on survival, not surrender. The mistress watched him vanish into the darkness. Her chest rose and fell, her hands trembling at her sides. She told herself it was fury, but deep inside, a thought whispered she dared not say aloud. She had looked into his eyes and found no weakness, and for the first time in her reign, she wondered if her trial might not break him at all. The cell was small, damp, and filled with a cold that cut deeper than chains. Ryan sat against the wall, the weight of iron biting into his wrists and ankles. Shadows crawled along the stone, shifting with every flicker of the dim crystal light above him. The silence pressed against his ears, broken only by the faint dripping of water from cracks in the ceiling. He breathed slowly, his chest rising and falling as he tried to prepare himself. Tomorrow, or maybe even tonight, the mistress would send him to the trial. Everyone expected him to break. Everyone wanted him to beg. The door screeched open, spilling harsh light into the cell. 2 guards entered, their faces covered by alien masks that hissed with each breath. They carried strange tools, metal rods tipped with glowing spikes, cuffs lined with sharp edges, and coils that hummed with energy. They laid them down on the table outside his bars, one by one, as though displaying a feast meant only for cruelty. Ryan's eyes followed each weapon, but he said nothing. One guard laughed, his voice rough. "How long do you think before this one cries? I say less than an hour." The other shook his head. "No, he is stubborn, maybe 2, but the mistress will enjoy watching him crawl." Their words were loud on purpose. They wanted him to hear, to taste fear before the trial even began. But Ryan stayed still. He remembered worse sounds, screams of dying soldiers on battlefields, the roar of engines failing in the void, the silence after comrades were lost. He had endured all that. He would endure this. When the guards left, Ryan leaned back against the wall and closed his eyes. His body was tired, but his mind burned. Images of the colony filled his thoughts, children huddling behind broken walls, families clinging to hope that someone would save them. He had promised he would fight for them, and promises to Ryan were chains stronger than steel. He whispered to himself, a vow in the silence, "I will not fall, not here, not before them." Hours passed. The cell grew darker, the single crystal dimming until it barely glowed. Then footsteps echoed outside. The mistress herself appeared, her tall figure framed in the doorway. The guards bowed and stepped back, leaving her to stand before his bars. She studied him in silence, her glowing eyes scanning his bruised face and chained body. She expected to see despair, but instead found a steady gaze staring back at her. Ryan's calmness unsettled her more than any insult. "You should already be broken," she said at last, her voice low and sharp. "Even my strongest warriors beg before the trial of shame. But you sit here as though this is nothing." Ryan's lips curved into the faintest smile. "Maybe it is nothing, or maybe your trial is not as terrifying as you want your people to believe." Her eyes narrowed, her voice rising with anger. "Do not mock me, human. You do not understand the pain you will face." Ryan leaned forward, chains clattering softly. "I understand pain. I've lived it. I've bled for others, carried weight no one else could. Whatever you think you can do to me, I've already faced worse." The mistress froze, her anger colliding with confusion. He spoke not with arrogance, but with certainty, as if the truth itself stood behind his words. Her chest tightened. This was no ordinary defiance. This was not the empty pride of a desperate man. This was something she could not name. "Your courage will die in that chamber," she whispered, though the words sounded weaker than she intended. "It always does." Ryan's voice remained calm. "Then I'll show you what happens when it doesn't." For a long moment, silence filled the cell. The mistress's hands trembled at her sides, though she quickly hid them in her flowing robes. She turned sharply and left, her footsteps echoing down the hall. The guards followed, their eyes filled with unease. When the cell door shut again, Ryan exhaled slowly. His body hurt, his muscles ached from days of captivity, but his spirit burned stronger. He had seen the flicker in her eyes, the hesitation, the uncertainty. She wanted him to break, but a part of her feared what would happen if he did not. Later, the guards returned, dragging chains across the floor. They unhooked the iron from the wall and pulled him to his feet. His legs shook, but he forced them steady. The tools on the table glowed faintly, their cruel edges catching the light. The guards sneered, tightening the cuffs around his wrists. "Enjoy your last moments, human," one said. "When the mistress is finished with you, you'll beg for death." Ryan met his gaze. "We'll see who begs." The guard struck him across the face, but Ryan did not fall. Blood traced his lip, and still he stood tall. They dragged him out of the cell, down the long corridors, toward the chamber of trials. Every step echoed with the sound of chains, but Ryan's mind was far away. He thought again of the colony, of the people who had no one else to fight for them. His pain was nothing compared to theirs. If he broke now, it would mean nothing mattered. And Ryan Cole never fought for nothing. As the great doors loomed ahead, carved with symbols of torment and glory, Ryan's eyes burned with fire. The mistress watched from her throne, her expression unreadable, though her heart pounded with something she would never admit: doubt. The trial of shame awaited, a place designed to strip flesh, soul, and dignity. The council whispered eagerly, their eyes shining with hunger for his downfall. Yet in the center of that storm, Ryan walked forward without hesitation. He was bruised, bloodied, and chained, but unbroken. And as he stepped across the threshold into the chamber, even the mistress felt a chill run through her. For the first time, she wondered if the trial would fail. She wondered if the insolent human might endure what no other had. The chamber of trials was nothing like Ryan had imagined. It was not a single room, but a vast maze carved deep beneath the palace, its walls alive with veins of glowing energy. The air was heavy, hot in some places and icy cold in others, and every breath burned like smoke. Strange machines lined the walls, their shapes alien and cruel, whirring softly as though waiting to be awakened. The guards shoved him inside and locked the door with a sound that echoed like thunder. The mistress's voice carried from above, cold and sharp, filling every corner of the chamber. "Here begins the trial of fire. No human has survived past the first hour. Do not expect mercy. Crawl, scream, and die as countless others have before you." The council cheered, their voices a wave of mockery and hunger. They leaned forward from their seats above, eager to see the human broken. Ryan stood alone in the center, chains removed but body bruised, his bare hands curling into fists. He lifted his eyes once to the mistress's throne and saw her gaze fixed on him. She looked certain of his failure, yet a shadow of curiosity lingered in her expression. The floor beneath him shifted suddenly, glowing with orange lines that spread out like cracks of fire. The heat surged up, forcing him to leap aside as the stones burned. A panel in the wall opened, releasing a jet of flame that roared across the room. The crowd cheered, but Ryan kept moving, rolling across the floor and diving behind a column. Sweat poured down his face, his lungs gasping from the smoke, but he stayed on his feet. More traps awakened. Spinning blades hissed through the air, their edges dripping with strange liquid that sizzled when it touched the ground. Platforms rose and fell without warning, forcing him to leap across gaps with only seconds to react. At one point, the floor vanished entirely, revealing a pit of molten metal below. Ryan clung to the edge, his fingers burning against the hot stone, before hauling himself back up with sheer strength. The aliens watching began to murmur. Some gasped when he escaped death again and again. Their cheers turned uncertain, no longer confident he would fail quickly. Even the mistress's lips pressed into a thin line. her fingers tapping against the armrest of her throne. She had expected him to cry out by now, to collapse in terror or agony. But Ryan pressed forward, each step defiant, each movement filled with stubborn will. Hours seemed to pass. His body was cut and bruised, blood streaking across his arms and face. His clothes were torn, smoke blackened his skin, and every muscle screamed with exhaustion. Yet he never stopped moving. He crawled when he could not run, dragged himself across hot stone when his legs trembled, and forced air into his burning lungs when his chest wanted to collapse. At one point, the chamber filled with a mist that burned the eyes and lungs. The pain was sharp, like knives inside his chest, but Ryan tore strips from his shirt and tied them around his mouth and nose. He stumbled forward, coughing, yet still alive. When electric whips lashed from the walls, he used broken pieces of debris as shields, sparks exploding around him. The council watched in silence now, their earlier laughter gone. Ryan's eyes burned with determination. He thought of the mistress's words, of her cruel smile when she promised he would crawl. He thought of the colony, of the faces of those who waited for him to return. Every memory became fuel, every scar a reminder that he could not break. Pain was nothing compared to failure. Finally, the chamber unleashed its final test. The walls themselves closed in, glowing with fire, ready to crush him like an insect. The ground shook violently, sending him sprawling onto his hands and knees. The heat seared his skin as the space grew smaller, tighter, the pressure threatening to snap bone. Ryan roared in defiance, forcing himself up and pressing against the burning walls. The fire scorched his palms, skin blistering, but he pushed with everything left inside him. For a moment, it seemed the chamber itself resisted, as though trying to swallow him whole. But Ryan did not let go. He screamed with raw fury, a sound that echoed like thunder, and the walls froze. The glow faded, the heat dimmed, and then, with a shudder, the chamber released him. The trial ended. The silence was deafening. The council sat frozen, their eyes wide, their voices caught in their throats. No one spoke, no one cheered. They had watched something none of them had ever seen before. A human walking out of the chamber of fire alive. Ryan staggered into the open, his body broken, but his eyes blazing with victory. Blood dripped from his wounds, his chest heaved with exhaustion, but he stood tall. He looked up at the mistress, and though his lips were cracked, a faint smirk pulled at the corner of his mouth. The mistress rose slowly from her throne, her eyes locked onto his, fury and disbelief battling inside her. This was impossible. No outsider, no alien, not even her strongest warriors had lasted so long. Yet this man, this human, stood alive before her council. Her lips trembled as she spoke, her voice low, heavy with something dangerous. He endures. The words spread like fire through the chamber. Some nobles cried out in shock, others whispered furiously, but all of them looked at Ryan differently now. No longer as prey, no longer as a weak animal. He had walked through fire and survived. Ryan met their stares with steady defiance. His body was wrecked, but his spirit shone unbroken. He had not come to bow. He had not come to beg. And with every scar burning on his flesh, he had shown them the truth. Humanity could not be broken. The mistress sat back down, her hands trembling against the arms of her throne. She told herself it was rage, but deep inside, she felt something else, something she could not name. She had wanted the human humiliated, destroyed, forgotten. Instead, he had become unforgettable. The chamber doors opened with a long, heavy groan, and Ryan stumbled out into the great hall. His body was battered, his skin blistered and burned, his clothes torn to rags, but his head remained high. Each step he took left faint streaks of blood on the polished stone, yet his stride carried pride, not defeat. The council sat in stunned silence. These nobles who had mocked him, who had laughed and made wagers about his suffering, now watched with wide eyes. Some clutched the edges of their robes, whispering to one another in disbelief. They had expected a corpse or a broken man crawling on his knees. Instead, they saw a human who had endured their sacred trial and walked out alive. Ryan's chest heaved as he reached the center of the hall. He did not speak. He did not bow. He only stood tall, defiance blazing in his eyes. His silence spoke louder than any words could have. He had survived. He had done what none of them believed possible. Above them all, the mistress rose from her throne. Her long robes swept around her like waves of shadow as she stepped forward. Her face was carved into a mask of authority, but her eyes betrayed the storm inside. Fury burned in them, yes, but also disbelief, and beneath that, something far more dangerous: uncertainty. "This cannot be," she said, her voice trembling despite her effort to keep it steady. "The chamber does not allow the unworthy to leave alive. You should be ashes, your body crushed, your mind shattered. And yet..." Her words trailed off as she looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw no weakness left to exploit. The nobles erupted into chaos. Some shouted that it was a trick, that the chamber must have malfunctioned. Others whispered that the human had been chosen, that the sacred place itself had accepted him. For every cry of outrage, another voice rose with awe. The hall became a storm of confusion, their orderly cruelty broken apart by the sight of one man who refused to kneel. The mistress lifted her hand, and silence returned at once. She stared down at Ryan, her lips curling in anger, though her voice betrayed the faintest crack. "You have endured what no outsider should, but do not think this makes you equal to us. You are still human, fragile, mortal, fleeting." Ryan raised his head, his voice raw but firm. "Maybe I am fragile, maybe I am mortal, but I'm still standing while your trials tried to kill me. What does that say about me? What does that say about you?" Gasps filled the chamber. No one had ever spoken to the mistress like this. A noble rose in outrage, his voice shaking with fury. "He insults us all! He must die!" Others echoed the call, but not all. Some remained silent, their eyes fixed on Ryan with expressions that carried something close to respect. The mistress descended the steps of her throne, her presence towering over him as she came closer. The firelight gleamed off her skin, and her shadow stretched across the broken man who refused to fall. She looked into his eyes, searching for fear, for even a trace of surrender, but she found only the unyielding steel of defiance. "You speak boldly," she said, her voice lower now, almost a whisper meant only for him. "But boldness is not strength. You have survived one trial, yes, but survival does not make you worthy." Ryan's lips curved faintly, almost a smile, though his body shook with exhaustion. "Worthy or not, I'm still here. That's more than you expected." The mistress's hand twitched as though she meant to strike him, but she stopped herself. Her people were watching, and for the first time in her reign, she could not decide what judgment to give. If she declared him unworthy, the council would doubt her, for the trial itself had failed to destroy him. If she declared him chosen, she risked giving power to a human, an outsider, one she had sworn to crush. The council grew restless. Whispers spread like fire, voices rising and falling. Some demanded his death, some demanded his freedom, some urged for a new trial. Every word chipped away at the mistress's control. She clenched her fists, her nails biting into her palms, but she could not silence the storm she herself had created. Ryan stood in the center, steady despite his pain, and he did not look away. His silence was heavier than their shouts, his presence stronger than their threats. He had turned their cruelty into his proof, their trial into his weapon. The mistress's lips parted as she finally spoke, her voice sharp, though cracks trembled beneath it. "You endure, yes, you defy. But understand this. Your victory changes nothing. You are still mine to judge, and I will not let one human break what my people have built for centuries." She turned sharply, sweeping back to her throne. But the silence in the hall was not the silence of obedience. It was the silence of doubt. The silence of seeds planted where none should have grown. The nobles exchanged uneasy glances, some even daring to look at the human not with scorn, but with recognition. Ryan wiped blood from his mouth, his gaze never leaving the mistress. He knew she hated him more now than ever, not because he had entered her sacred place, not because he had insulted her laws, but because he had done the one thing she could never allow. He had proven her wrong in front of her entire court. And though his body screamed for rest, though every wound burned with fire, Ryan Cole stood tall. He had survived the unthinkable. He had taken their trial meant for shame and turned it into a victory none could deny. The mistress might have called him insolent, might have spat her fury at him, but in the eyes of her people, he was no longer just a prisoner. He was something far more dangerous, a human who could not be broken. The hall was empty now. The voices of the council faded into silence. Ryan sat alone in a guarded chamber, his body still trembling from the trial, but his mind sharp, restless. The wounds on his arms burned, his chest ached with every breath, Yet his spirit refused to collapse. He had faced their fire, their blades, their poisons, and he still stood. He had proven himself, but he knew it was not over. The mistress was not finished with him. She would never allow her pride to be shattered so easily. The door opened without warning, and the mistress entered. No guards followed her this time. She came alone, her tall figure filling the room like a storm cloud. Her steps were slow, deliberate, her robes whispering across the floor. The glow in her eyes was softer than before, not the raw fury of the trial, but something heavier, something that even she could not name. Ryan pushed himself to his feet, though the effort nearly made his knees buckle. He would not let her see him weak, not even now. Their gazes met, a silent war burning between them. For a long time, she said nothing. She studied him as though searching for cracks in his spirit, waiting for him to falter. But there were none. He stood tall, steady, even as blood dried on his skin and pain carved lines into his face. Finally, her voice broke the silence. "Why?" Ryan frowned, unsure of her meaning. "Why what?" Her jaw tightened. "Why did you not break? Why did you not fall to your knees like all the others? Even my strongest champions cried for mercy inside that chamber. Yet you, a human, you walked out alive." Ryan's reply was simple, his tone calm though it carried weight. "Because I had no choice. I made a promise, and humans don't run from promises." The mistress's eyes narrowed, her voice sharp. "A promise? To whom? To your people who hide behind walls, praying for survival? To a dying colony that will never even know if you live or die? What worth is such a promise?" Ryan stepped forward, his shadow crossing hers. "To me, it's worth everything. My people don't need gods or chambers of fire to tell them what matters. We fight because we must. We endure because others depend on us. That is what makes us strong." Her lips parted slightly, her breath catching for a moment before she regained control. She had ruled for centuries, her power unquestioned, her people bound by fear. They obeyed her not because they loved her, but because they feared punishment, feared shame. Yet this human, standing bruised and broken before her, carried strength she could not understand. His strength came not from fear, but from something else entirely. "You speak of strength as though it is yours to claim," she said coldly, but her voice trembled at the edges. "Do you not see what you are? Small, fragile, nothing compared to my people. You bleed, you suffer, you die, and yet you call yourself strong?" Ryan's reply was steady. Strength isn't about not bleeding. It's about standing after you bleed. Strength isn't about never falling. It's about getting back up when the world tries to crush you. If you don't understand that, then maybe you don't understand strength at all. The mistress's hand twitched at her side, her nails biting into her palm as though his words were knives. For centuries, she had spoken of her people as superior, her rule as absolute. No one had dared to challenge her. No one had dared to speak such words in her presence. Yet now, here was a human, defying her even in chains, teaching her truths she had never wanted to hear. "You are insolent," she whispered, though her voice was weak. "You are beneath me. And yet—" She stopped, the words dying on her tongue. She turned away from him, her long hair shifting like a dark river across her shoulders. Her chest rose and fell sharply, her hands trembling. Ryan's eyes stayed fixed on her. He saw the cracks forming, the doubts she was trying to bury beneath her pride. He could almost feel the storm inside her, the battle between anger and something dangerously close to respect. "You doubt yourself," Ryan said softly. Her head snapped back toward him, her eyes blazing. "I do not doubt. I am mistress of this palace. I am the voice of law, the will of my people. I do not doubt." But even as she shouted, her voice shook. Ryan said nothing, letting the silence carry his answer. Her own trembling breath betrayed her. For the first time in her reign, she had been forced to question her strength. And it was not by armies, not by rival lords, not by betrayal from within. It was by a single human who refused to break. The mistress took a slow step back, her expression unreadable, her voice low and heavy. "You are dangerous. Not because of your body, not because of your weapons, but because of what you make others see. You make them doubt me." Ryan's lips curved faintly. "Maybe they don't doubt you. Maybe they just see another way." Her hands clenched again, her fury returning to cover the cracks. "Do not mistake this moment for victory. You are still mine to command. I could end you here with a word." Ryan's voice was quiet but unshaken. "Then do it. But if you don't..." Then you've already admitted I'm more than you want me to be. Her silence was sharper than any blade. She turned suddenly, her robes swirling, and walked to the door. Her voice echoed one last time before she vanished into the shadows beyond. You will not change me, human, but I fear you may already have changed everything else. Ryan was left alone in the chamber, the weight of her words pressing down on him. His body burned with pain, his future uncertain, but one truth had become clear. The mistress was no longer unshakable. And for the first time, the human realized he had not just survived her trials. He had planted doubt in the heart of a ruler who had never known fear. The council chamber was crowded again, every noble eager to hear the mistress's judgment. The air was heavy with tension, whispers filling the hall like restless winds. All eyes were fixed on the throne, where the mistress sat in silence, her hands gripping the arms tightly, as though she feared her own decision. Below, Ryan stood in chains once more, but the sight of him was different now. He was no longer just a prisoner dragged in shame. He was the man who had endured their sacred chamber and defied every expectation. His body was wounded, but his spirit burned brighter than ever. The mistress rose slowly, her robes gliding across the floor as she descended from the throne. The crowd hushed instantly. Her steps echoed, each one measured, each one heavy with meaning. She stopped before Ryan, her glowing eyes locked onto his. For a long moment, no words were spoken, only silence stretching between them. Silence so deep it made the nobles shift nervously in their seats. Finally, her voice rang out, strong and sharp. This human entered the chamber of my ancestors. He touched what was forbidden. He defiled what was sacred. By law, his punishment should be death. The nobles nodded eagerly, some cheering at her words. But then she raised her hand, silencing them before the roar could grow. Her next words struck like a thunderclap. And yet, he lives. The chamber froze. The mistress's voice shook slightly, though she forced strength into it. No one has ever survived such a trial. No one has endured as he has. The chamber itself did not destroy him. It allowed him to pass. Does this mean he is chosen? Or does it mean he is cursed? That is for us to decide. Whispers broke out, frantic and urgent. Some nobles shouted that he must be destroyed before his survival inspired rebellion. Others said he was proof of destiny, a sign that their old laws were changing. The debates spread like fire through dry grass, their order breaking into chaos. Ryan stood tall in the center, saying nothing. His silence was louder than their shouting. He simply looked at the mistress, his gaze steady, daring her to decide. The mistress turned her face away, closing her eyes for a moment as though struggling with herself. Inside, her heart was at war. Part of her wanted to kill him here, to end the defiance, to remind everyone of her power. But another part, one she had buried long ago, whispered that this human had proven a truth her people had forgotten. Strength was not fear. Strength was not cruelty. Strength was endurance, will, and the refusal to fall. She opened her eyes again, her voice firm though softer than before. Hear me, my counsel. This human has insulted me, yes. He has defied me, yes. But he has also endured what none of you could. He stood where your champions fell. He survived where your warriors screamed for mercy. And because of that, I cannot deny what my eyes have seen. The chamber has spoken. He is no longer a prisoner. Gasps filled the hall. Some nobles shouted in protest, rising to their feet, their faces red with rage. Others bowed their heads in silence, unwilling to challenge her words. A few even looked at Ryan with awe, respect flickering in their alien eyes. The mistress turned back to Ryan, her voice dropping low so that only he could hear, though everyone strained to catch her words. You are still insolent, human, still beneath me, but you are no longer only an intruder. You are something else now, something dangerous, perhaps even something needed. Ryan lifted his head, his eyes never leaving hers. You can call me what you like, but you and I both know what I am. I am the proof you cannot break us. Her lips trembled, her mask of authority cracking for just an instant. She spun sharply, returning to her throne, hiding the storm in her chest. Her people needed to see her strong, but inside she knew the truth. This human had changed everything. His defiance had planted a seed of doubt in her heart, and doubt in the hearts of her nobles. The council chamber broke into chaos again, voices rising in anger and fear. Some demanded war against humanity, others demanded alliance, but none could agree. Through it all, Ryan stood steady, unbowed, unbroken. His very presence was a challenge, his survival a weapon more powerful than any blade. The mistress raised her hand one final time, her voice thundering through the hall. Enough. The human stays. He will not be executed. He will not be cast into chains again. From this day, his fate is tied to mine. He lives under my judgment and my protection. The hall erupted in uproar, but none dared to openly defy her decree. Guards looked uneasy, nobles whispered furiously, and some bowed in silent acceptance. Ryan exhaled slowly, his body trembling but his spirit steady. He had not only survived, he had forced the mistress to speak words she had never spoken before, words of acknowledgement, words of respect. As the hall emptied, the mistress sat back on her throne, her eyes fixed on him. She told herself she still hated him, still despised his defiance. But deep inside, she knew the truth she could not erase. This insolent human, this fragile outsider, had walked into her world and left it forever changed. And whether she admitted it or not, she would never look at him, or at humanity, the same way again.